I want to film a quick tutorial to show you how to stitch out this design for an Edwardian tie with punched work. They're really sweet and they can go with a variety of ribbon. For this one, I'm using this light blue thread in both the top and in the bobbin because it matches this great ribbon that I have and it'll be easier to see on the screen. And this design has 3 color changes in it, but we're really only using 1 color of thread. So I want to show you what those other color changes are all about. So first, go ahead and thread your machine with whatever color you want to use in both the top and the bottom. Color number 1 is going to stitch out the punched work portion of this design, and you're going to want to put a big wing needle in your machine. Now some of them say hem stitch and others say wing needle, but these are exactly the same thing. And if you've never used one of these, it's a needle that has this big blade on the side, so it's going to punch a really large hole in your fabric as it goes through, and then the stitches are going to help hold that hole open. Now the shank on these is often a little bit wider than your standard machine needle, so make sure that you unscrew it far enough to really fit this in there. It may feel like it's going in the slot if it's not unscrewed wide enough, but it'll just drop out and that'll really jam up your machine. So make sure you've unscrewed it wide enough so you can tighten it against this big shank. So my wing needle is secured and threaded, and I'm going to go ahead and start color number 1. So as it stitches this color of the design, you can see that the needle is poking really big holes in the fabric, and it's going over each stitch multiple times. This is holding it open in a little grid work of open holes and tight stitches, so it's going to keep those holes open. And this looks the same as the punched work that you do by hand, which is also done with a large needle and pulling the stitches tight. So this is a really good approximation of the handwork technique. So the embroidery machine is going to go ahead and stitch out all the areas of punch work and then stop for the next color change. So the machine has finished color number 1 and it has stopped for us to change the color, which isn't really a color change but a needle change. So at this point you're going to change back to your regular needle. Once your regular needle is back in the machine, go ahead and stitch color number 2. This is going to stitch a zigzag stitch all the way around the outline of the entire tie. It's finished stitching that zigzag outline, so now you want to go ahead and cut your threads and remove the hoop from the machine, but don't remove the fabric from the hoop. So now you can see the design that's been stitched out so far. Lay this on a flat surface and go ahead and cut just a really small hole with a sharp pair of scissors just through the linen fabric. Don't cut through the stabilizer. And once you have that started, I like to switch to a pair of scissors that has this kind of blunt rounded edge at one end that also snips really well right at the tips. And what you're going to do is use the blunt edge towards the stabilizer so that it doesn't catch it, and then trim really closely around those zigzag stitches all the way around the design. I find that it helps to put just a little bit of pressure on the linen. Try not to distort the fabric in the hoop or pull on it. You don't want to move it out of place, but just go ahead and put a slight tension on it so that you can clip right up against those threads. So you can see why it's really helpful to have scissors that snip right at the tips. And I'm just following right along that line. So go ahead and do this all the way around the entire shape. Here's the design once it's been trimmed. As you can see, I've gone around all of the outline and trimmed away the linen. And I did clip a few of the zigzag stitches as I was trimming, which isn't as a big deal because we're going to go back over them 2 more times. So the next step in the machine is going to go ahead and go around the outline again and secure it and add a little bit of padding. You can pause it at that point and see if you've missed any loose threads and go ahead and trim them a little bit shorter, but you should be pretty good if it looks like this at this stage. So we're going to put it back in the machine and go ahead and start color number 3. So here you can see the final design has been stitched out. It stitched out all the center of the design as well as finished all those raw edges. So this is completed in the hoop, so it's ready to go as soon as you wash out all the stabilizer. I'll show you how to add a bow and a pin in just a minute, and then it'll be ready to wear. Now that our tie is washed and dried, I've pressed it, and now it's ready for finishing. So to finish, we need 18 inches of velvet ribbon. This is just a little under 2 inches wide. And I'm going to measure 2.5 inches down from one end and just trim off that one little piece. So take this short piece that you cut over to your iron. You're going to press one of the cut ends under in a really narrow hem, like 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And then you're going to press it roughly in thirds. So you're going to press one part in towards the center and cover it up with the other so that it's about 1/3 of its original length. And just give that a very gentle press so that you have a little finished strip of ribbon. With the longer piece, we're going to fold it in half. With some thread that matches the ribbon, I'm just going to do a really quick running stitch along that line, just in and out. These don't have to be super strong stitches. We just have to create a little bit of a seam right there. Just a couple stitches along the edge to anchor that. Now I'm going to fold open that seam. So once I've opened up that seam, I've finger pressed a little crease right in the center of my ribbon, and I'm going to lay that crease right on top of that seam. So it's forming 2 loops of the bow. And then right where that crease is and where that previous seam is, I'm just going to take my thread, which is still anchored, and go ahead and do a few more running stitches right along that seam line, just through all the layers. And these are going to be big stitches because this is really thick right here. So you really only need 3 or 4, maybe 5 to go all the way across. Once you have those stitches in, you're just going to pull gently just to gather it up slightly, and then anchor your stitches off. Now this isn't as tightly gathered as we want it, but at least it keeps it in place with a slight gather. So now I'm going to take my piece of folded ribbon, and I'm going to take the side that has the open edge and the raw edge and place that right against the center of my bow. And I'm just going to do a couple quick whip stitches right over this raw edge of ribbon just to anchor it in place. And I'm placing the edge of this about 1/4 of the way into the wider ribbon. So it's going to be more to one side, not quite in the middle. Now that that's anchored in place, go ahead and flip it over. Wrap this ribbon around and make sure that it is centered over your gathers. And you can gather and pleat the ribbon a little bit more to just create a very pleasing bow shape. So we're just going to wrap this strip around and then bring it to the back. And this is a finished edge, so it's going to be nice and easy to go ahead and keep that clean on the back side. I'm just going to overlap it so that it covers the raw edge that we tacked in place, and then do a few stitches from the fold of one piece to the fold on the finished edge, and just do a few little stitches to hold everything together. So now we have a neat and tidy bow. If you want to, you can pull these loose ends down a little bit to give it more of a double bow look. And if you want to hold it in that position, you can just take a couple little stitches through one of these folds so that they're hidden and keep it so that it holds that shape. And then the last thing to do is to take some scissors, and you're going to cut a really narrow angle from this point on the outside to just maybe 1/4 of an inch in at the top. So now that's just slightly angled. We're going to do the same thing over here, from wherever your bottom edge is to just about 1/4 of an inch in at the top. And you have just a tiny slant on your ribbon now, which will help it not fray, and it'll make it look a little bit more attractive when it's layered out. So now we have our finished bow, and we have your embroidered tie. Place the front side of your tie against the back side of your bow, and anchor it into place with just a few small stitches. At this point, you can also add a pin back here or just plan to use a safety pin and attach it to your collar. And there you go, a finished Edwardian tie.